So welcome everybody as I just pop our slide up so that we can see a bigger screen. So this is our final session for CHCDFV001, which stands, of course, for Domestic and Family Violence. I've just opened up the session tonight. So I'm Vicky Hanna. I'm going to be your trainer for tonight. And we're right at the end of this unit. So what we have been doing is covering what is abuse, how to identify it, how to respond to it. Then we've had a look at what might be the stories, and then how do we look after ourselves while we're looking after our clients as well. And then this week is our final week, and we're actually jumping into the technique around that. And there's been some really amazing feedback from the learners as well throughout the week. So we'll share some of that around our frequently asked questions. And then if there's anything more to do in this final session around if you need role plays or you want to book them in, we'll be able to do that. And then how to go about doing that. If you haven't got somebody you can do them with, or if your role play says, please jump in and get a trainer to do that for you. So we are available, and we are definitely working on Saturdays and Sundays to make that happen and fit in with you as well. So session 3 is our final one for this one. And let's just do a little bit of our intro, of course. Have I got a learner who would like to do the acknowledgement to country tonight?
I will do it. Rose, in the spirit of reconciliation, Ada Institute of Education acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We recognize Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the first inhabitants of this nation and the traditional custodians of the land on which we work, live, and study. We express our gratitude for the sharing of this land, our sorrow for the personal, spiritual, and cultural costs of that sharing, and hope that we may move forward together in harmony and in the spirit of healing. We pay our respect to all First Nation people and acknowledge elders past, present, and emerging.
Thank you very much, Rose. So just move that, just as we have a few people joining us in the times that we've got available. I will just do that and let them into class. So a little bit of housekeeping as we do every week. Cameras on if you can. If bandwidth is playing up for you, then sometimes going off camera. I know that we do have learners that join us in class remotely and can only watch the recordings. I thank everybody who does come on camera and does the breakout work and some of the rich peer discussions that we have, which I know a lot of you are working in the sector already, and that's amazing to get that. But it's also really great to have fresh eyes over particular perspectives. And we do talk about what is it that I might have, the lens that I look through, and then how am I going to make sure that that is both legal and ethically safe for our clients. Microphones on mute in case there's a little bit of background noise. We will have a class break, of course. We'll have participation. Sometimes we can put a hand up if the whole group are on the whole page, which is fine, but it's not an interruption. Please don't apologise. If you've got something to say, this is your class. Just say, Vicky, can I drop something in there? Absolutely, please speak up, because you do have a copy of these PowerPoint slides. Our groups are always respectful relationships with each other. We use that our language needs to be safe and respectful, and it's also how we conduct ourselves in the workplace. No smoking or vaping on camera, and they're the sorts of things you do have control over your camera. Trigger warning or an adverse response. So a trigger warning might be, especially with sensitive topics, you or someone you know may have had an experience around abuse, whether it's domestic family violence or elder abuse. It all still sits in around the complexity that sits with our families. So we have numbers after that we can call, which would be Lifeline 13 11 14 or 13 Yarn. there are some excellent after hours numbers, but Lifeline are a great resource. And if there is something that is bothering you, then you can give them a call and just let them know, hey, I'm a student, we're covering a topic and it's a bit unsettling for me. And I'd really like to just sort of maybe discuss, how do workers deal with this when they're hearing really sad stories throughout the day? And then be kind to yourself. Learning is a journey. I still study. And there's lots of things that I don't know. And I rely on others to be able to help me through that. So I want you to reach out. Hater are responsive. If for some reason you feel that you sent something on a Friday night and you haven't got an answer by 7 a.m. on Monday, it's likely that we don't have somebody in that space all weekend, or we are really booked out already. So you can make a booking with myself as a trainer, or you can go into our booking system and get a selection of trainers there who will be able to assist you with that. So please reach out and use your booking system, or send an email, and if I can, I will definitely touch base with you quicker. So just a bit of an overview of what we're going to cover in the last bit of this. And then what I'd like to do is help you with your assessment work towards the end. So rights and responsibilities of our clients. The others could be the people that they're around and young people. And then it can also be my connection saying it's unstable, sorry. It can also be around our peers and our colleagues. So if someone comes in and they're loud and aggressive and we're trying to de-escalate that situation, it can be very disturbing for our colleagues as well. So we have a duty of care to our client, and we also have a duty of care to our colleagues. So if we know that someone has the potential, we need to do that preventative work, and we're going to unpack how do we actually do that and still work in that space. It's also really important to remember that our clients aren't always victim survivors. They are often offenders as well. But the fact that they are before you, and you as a worker, is you're working with them. So they may have come through that and been a survivor, but they may also be under an order and not really understand that, why is that abuse where my mum stayed? And she never left my dad. And he used to give her a smack around the ear on a Friday night. What lens is that person looking through? So it's about what is something that they grew up, what is their family language, what is how they solve problems. So we don't yet know until we unpack that with our clients. There's quite a lot about domestic family violence in the media at the moment. It's definitely a political platform as well as heightened. The reason being is that people are being murdered and they're being murdered by their intimate partners or their ex-partners. So it definitely is in the public's interest to be able to deal with that. But there's a lot that never make it to the media as well. Some of the conversations are around needs assessment. And there is some discussion around this happens more so in low socioeconomic areas. Now, that's a myth. And in your studies, we've covered that. This can happen to anybody on any income. This can happen to anybody in any suburb. This can happen to anybody, regardless of their level of education. Domestic and family violence can happen and does happen in every setting. We are responding to our clients' needs, so really hearing, am I just jumping in and doing all these kind of things for them, or am I really listening? I've given you feedback about what is the most important thing for someone who comes to tell you that they may be in an abusive relationship, or they're ready to go and they want to have a safety plan to exit and they're coming to us for assistance. This is about our knowledge around that. So responding to their needs and really hearing what it is rather than going into too much too soon. What is it right here, right now? And then also referral sources. So who do we refer somebody to if our service doesn't provide it, or if we are just at that intake stage and we don't know enough about it to feel confident? then that is part of your onboarding when you join an organization. So at no way would you be doing a Cert IV, graduate, and then do your placement, and no one is going to put you in that front line. Everything is about level entry when you come in. But if you're already working in the sector, then you may be building upon this, and this qualification is going to help you to be given opportunities. And I want also that self-reflection around resources as well. We have to be certain that we don't have our own lens over this. So I am in the 70s, so a very, very long time ago, a survivor of domestic and family violence. So in the 70s, there was not a lot of information and education around that. A lot of people didn't even know that they were being abused. Now there's a whole lot of other language around that. So for me, I'm aware that there is a cycle in violence, and that if there's a couple of people in there, then there's particular cues that people do to be able to survive or try and keep the peace. And that happens in both ways. And then we spoke last week around what is the cycle of violence. And so when we become aware, or we can acknowledge, then we can actually do that body of work. So the gentle way that we approach this is really hear what someone is saying. What's your biggest priority right now while you're here? Need emergency accommodation. That's the only place that we go in our conversation. Okay, I understand. Is that something that you're ready to go now? What kind of supports do you need? That's how we do it. So it's about how high is that risk, and do we need to do some reporting, some mandatory reporting around that? And that will depend on our position description as well. So first up, how do we identify the client's needs? So, okay, the last thing I would ask someone in a domestic family violence is, could you please fill in this questionnaire? But I think in that it might mean that at our intake, often we might say, could you just fill in your name? You've never worked with that client before. And there's some questions in there. It's still up to the client to say whether they're going to tick those boxes, but it's in there. So like, are you currently experiencing domestic family violence at the moment? So if we weren't face to face and we were doing this over the phone and they made a call, I would need to be able to make sure that I ask certain questions to make sure they're safe. And then we need to document what we said on the phone. So how do we document that? It's never subjective. So we would say wording like the client stated, rather than I think the client this. So it can't be opinion based, because your case notes could end up being evidence in court. Did they contact ACME organisation and speak to Trent? Yes, Trent has evidence of that. Trent took a call at 9:10 a.m. in the morning, spoke to Billy. Billy was asked a couple of questions around it. I asked these questions. Billy confirmed this, Billy confirmed that. Billy was uncertain, stated they were unsure about that. And that's our evidence. And then you would sign that off, made an appointment for Billy to come in, or would Billy like a worker to attend, depending on what your organisation does. So those documents could be, someone might say, oh, you're just making that up. That's never happened. Well, Billy could say, well, actually, I did. I first went to ACME organisation. I spoke to Trent, and then Trent got me an appointment that same day. And there's an evidence trail around that. So often when people end up around the court system, around domestic and family violence, it will be that, well, you never once spoke about domestic family violence. Then they can say, well, I did see a worker. And if you had legal representation or the client needed that, they can actually ask for copies of those file notes, because the client always owns the record. It is their file. So they're not going to pick it up and take it out. But if there's content in there, absolutely, whatever we write, we need to have that lens over it, that the client could read this, or this could be read out in court. And a lot of victim survivors will rely on you having filled in an incident report form or something along those lines. Classification tools. So we use them when we're doing our sessions. We're going to do it in a breakout room. So a classification tool is risk. So it's low, medium, high, we'll say that. We do a classification when we come in around how we're traveling, and we do our check-in number on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 is I'm feeling fairly flat and low, and 10 is I'm fairly up. And I've got a lot of energy, and then 5 is kind of like in the middle. I'm just regulating how I feel. So we might do a check-in with the client and say, how are you today? And then that's not a yes or a no answer. So when we want to get some communication with our client, we need to remember we have to ask open-ended questions. Some are closed, like, are you ready to leave? That is a yes or a no, or I'm not sure. Okay, so you're trying to assess in a classification tool, and you might have a box on your form that says high, medium to high, and then what that looks like when we bring them back into what the action plan is, and then information from other service providers and your own. So we might go, well, this card has all those after hours numbers, and I want you to have this as a safety kit. Here are some apps on your screen that if you go into that place, then you can quickly jump out of that safely as well. So one of the providers that we look at would be a domestic and family violence organisation, and in your breakout room, we're going to do that as well. You can research one. I can give you one to be able to work with as well. So what might a client need? What would economic support look like for a client who's come to us? Can anyone have a guess what that might mean?
I could guess maybe support with housing. Yeah, depending on the perpetrator's actions, they might have been kicked out of the house or left due to safety.
Yep. So it might be a motel room for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, crisis accommodation, or and then looking at long term.
Yep, absolutely. It could also be a voucher to go and get some food or some clothing items, cash cards and things like that. So economic support, that's the emergency crisis response. And then maybe they need assistance to go to Centrelink and say their circumstances have changed, that kind of thing. Access to services and information. So that could come in brochures. One of our assessment pieces is design a brochure that has that information, tells the story around it. Some of these points here. Ongoing assessment, it can take on average 7 times for somebody to leave a domestic family violence situation. So that means there's lots of attempts. So ongoing assessment would be they keep coming in and you're working on strength base. It's not our role to tell someone to leave. It's our role to ask them, what is it that you would like to do? How could I help you most of all? But every victim survivor will come back to you and say, being believed and validated when I come in and speak to somebody, often because the offending person may say things like, no one will ever believe you, because it is often behind closed doors. If it happened in broad daylight in public, that's assault. And that's why it's so easy for police to be able to recognize a crime has been committed. But when you are being psychologically abused or financially abused or emotionally abused, or the abuse is physical and yet it's hidden away behind clothing and things like that, often when police respond, they can't actually measure that there is a crime. That's why it is so difficult. Your word could be believed by the police or it may not. But the police, for them to make a charge, they must have evidence to take it to court. And then the evidence has to be pure. It has to be a third party. So it might be the police took the photos or you went to a hospital. So if someone says, I could assist you, I can see there's something going on there. Did you speak to your GP? Now, the GP is not evidence. The GP can only say the patient presented with some wounds and they stated their partner did that. That is not evidence. That is evidence that you went and saw a GP. evidence that the GP also saw those bruises, but there is no evidence to say other than what the person stated. So it's quite difficult to prove these things. So when it goes to court, they must have evidence. And so the kind of evidence must be indisputable, or it will get thrown out of court, and the prosecution will not use public funds to go to court and lose a case. That is not what it's for. So there's a lot of chatter around making sure that domestic and family violence has the powers built into the order, so the police aren't required to have all of that evidence around it. Like, I believe clients when they tell me, I believe client, even if like if it's the offender, that they're remorseful and they want to turn things around. My work is not about that. My work is to only keep documented facts. So in case somebody says, I want to subpoena those records around it, and it becomes a really important part of an investigation. So there has been murder cases where people have gone and had counselling separately and together. One of our scenarios in this is about the couple come in and one doesn't recognise that. It was a case in Queensland, Baden Clay, where he had murdered his partner, his wife, and he had taken the body and dumped the body, and he had put out, my wife is missing, she hasn't come back from her walk. And 10 days later, they found her in a creek bed. And so there was a lot of evidence that happened around that, and there was still a lot of public like looking for her and what's happened to Alison Baden Clay. And if that's a case that you're not familiar with, it's public, and so you could investigate that. So that person is incarcerated in prison. That person will be released. I can't exactly remember, but that might be the case that you decide to bring up in your breakout room. And then referrals to specialist services. So it's often an uncontrolled burst of anger, but it can also be intentional, long-term, and planned. That person. So Baden Clay was caught by looking up things on the website, clearly, you know, not thinking that people will go looking, that the grass that was at the house was not the grass and the flora that was at the creek bed. So they were able to forensically match all of those things up. So it has to be where, unfortunately, a lot of the victims have to do their own evidence. So they go to the hospital and they present in emergency. That then gets triaged, and a mental health worker will come and do an assessment. So then that becomes different, and that becomes evidence that can be used in court. So the rights and safety around you, the client, and your colleagues. The legislative rights and responsibilities. If there are children involved, you must report. You will report to your line manager, and you will follow the policies and procedures that sit around that. And how you document your file notes, that is also the legislative. So the law says that you must not have subjective file notes. Your file notes, your reflection journal is yours, and so you can just speak freely in that as you write. But your written notes, they're very important. So your reflection journal is unpacking that for yourself. It's like, wow, that was really triggering for me, or gosh, I don't know if I even believe that person. You can write that in your reflection notes, and you would talk to your supervisor about that. I don't know, my gut said something's not quite right there. We're speaking freely in those places, but our written word and how we state our conversation to every party that we're working with must be professional. And that's where our legislation sits around it. No discrimination, non-judgmental, duty of care, dignity of risk. So if someone says, look, no, I'm not ready to leave, you may have grave concerns for that person. However, you cannot make somebody do that. You can give them the information, and that's the importance. Confidentiality and consent. Those two things are written in there because they're two steps to the privacy and confidentiality. So how do we say that? We ran through that a little bit, and then the workers code of ethics where there's an ethical dilemma. So if you overheard a worker saying to another worker, oh, he did it for sure, I know the type, that is a code of ethic that must be reported up to your line manager, and just say, I'm not going to name names of staff, but I need to let you know we may have to go back and revisit our code of conduct for our workers, because that is unlawful language. When there's matters around cultural safety in our words, where we make a judgment based on the kind of car that someone pulls up in to get their services, how they present themselves, that is discrimination. So we're governed by those laws. So let's just jump out and do, just for the sake of our skills, strengthening our skills. So could we maybe just break into, we have 14 people here tonight, so I'm going to put everybody into a breakout room with just one other person. So if there's 3, that'll be the odd numbers, but please jump into the breakout room. Know that I don't record it, but you are going to come back out of that breakout room. And what I want you to do is go through the privacy and confidentiality, and I'm going to give you a scenario. So I'll just drop that in. It's a brief one. We can use the case notes that we were referring to with this assessment. There's, not sure if I'm spelling this correctly. Who's been working on this particular assessment? Is it Pranika in this assessment? Has anybody opened that up to have a look? Well, for the sake of our breakout room and our practice, we will use the word Priyanka. So Priyanka is a well-dressed female whose partner.
Priscilla.
Sorry?
Priscilla.
Is it Priscilla?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, I thought it was like Priyanka or Pranika. There you go. Anyway, we'll call her Priscilla. Trent, I'm with you. Priscilla.
Priyanka is pretty cool.
It is. So if we go, well-dressed female whose partner is out of town for work. So this is how it goes. However, let's say Betty is the worker and looks at Priyanka and decides she doesn't need that. What? Very well dressed. In expensive clothes and drove up in a fancy car. I don't know what a fancy car is. I drive a RAV. What's a fancy car? Someone help me. What says money to you if they pull up in a vehicle?
An Audi.
An Audi. An Audi as in, is that what James Bond drove?
He probably drove all the expensive cars.
I like the one where he had the defibrillator in. What a cool thing to have in your car. Okay.
Something.
Having your very own defibrillator. Okay, there we go. I think I've got that right. In a fancy Audi. Hope I spelt that correctly. Dripping in gold jewelry. How's that? That's the appearance. So if we make an impression about somebody in the first 45 seconds before we even speak, image matters, and it's our lens. So you've got a well-dressed female whose partner is out of town for work. Betty, the worker, looks at Priyanka and decides she doesn't need support. very well dressed in expensive clothes and drove in, fancy Audi, dripping in gold jewelry. Priyanka says, I am a battered wife and I need somewhere to stay. I am ready to leave today. Okay, so I keep spelling her name differently. So that's your scenario. You're going to jump in, and it is one of your assessment pieces as well. So I want you to do your intake. I want you to start with practicing that, knowing that it is about informed consent. So it's the privacy and confidentiality and get consent. Now that's not scripted, but I want it to be from you, authentic. So it's like, before we start, Priyanka, I need to be able to just cover this, that to reassure you that everything you say is private and confidential. The only time we might sorry. The only time that we might change that would be when there is safety involved. And so in that safety, I may need to report that to my line manager just to get some feedback around that. Do I have your consent to report to my line manager? Now, Priyanka can at that point decide, I'm not going to tell you everything. That's what consent is. If we just go through it and they say something and we write it down and we go and report it anyway, there has been no consent. That just means you rattled it off and you didn't wait and hear from them that where they go. Even if you just say, do you understand? Yes, I understand. You have to get that. Okay. Some places get you, if it's face to face, could you just sign that there that I have your consent? They will actually get permission. And they do it softly, not like, oh, here's all this business end of it. It's like, just so that I make sure that you know I have to work around your privacy and to be able to share anything, I need your consent. And I would share something. I would tell you that I was going to share it unless I thought that you were at risk, your safety was at risk, or other people's safety was at risk. Okay, then you don't need consent, but you're advising them that you will say something. And how you say that in your own words, as long as you are saying it, then that is enough in that process. Does that make sense? So it's not scripted, it's not robotic. It doesn't have to be the very first thing that you say, but if you think you're starting to get into that territory, you might let Priyanka talk. Tell me why you're here today, Priyanka. And then that, but Priyanka, whoever plays Priyanka, you're coming in and you're saying that story, and the worker, you're actually doing it the wrong way. So you're just going, well, you don't look like you need it. I want you to actually be a bad youth worker. Okay. And then we're going to come out of the breakout rooms and Priyanka's going to say how they felt about what was going on for the worker. And then the worker, whoever plays, did we give Betty? Then Betty can go, we'll ask Betty questions. Well, why did you go like that? What was happening for you? Okay, we've got to still look at it. It's easy to learn the right way to do it, but if we don't talk about what could be uncomfortable and hear it from somebody, it is just a role play. It's not really happening. Betty can't pick on you in the role play or the breakout room. Okay, so all right, so what we have is we're going to break into rooms. So I'm going to stop recording and not a problem. And when you come back out of the breakout rooms, we're going to do sharing. We're going to hear it from both rather than a spokesperson, and we'll jump around the room and do that. So we'll pause. Okay, we've got people returning, which is great. How did you go, Sky? Did I end up putting you in a room? And
yeah, I ended up being with Grace, and we did that role play, and I was the social worker, and it was a bit confronting. I felt yeah, bad saying the stuff that I was saying, even though it was pretend and it was forced, and like the words coming out of my mouth just felt so wrong and ignorant and just blame shaming.
Mm.
Yeah. So that ethical dilemma, isn't it? So you wouldn't do that, which is why you struggled with it as well. But that's, you know, we work on worldview, our own moral compass. That's what you're going through in that space. So you may be witness to it, and victim survivors often hear things like that. So it's the opposite to how you do it. So I'm sorry that that felt awkward for you, Sky, but I just want you to know none of that is true. Sky would definitely not do that. Anyone that I asked to be Betty, please know that I know that isn't what you're doing, but it's foreign to do it. And so what it does is it gives us another layer of making sure that we are aware of what that might be like, not only for us, but if we hear that's happening to a client as well. Have I got any other Bettys that want to share? Sky saying, so Sky, would it be, what would be the wording around that for you? So felt.
I just couldn't believe the words that were coming out of me. I felt very aggressive, and yeah, I just felt dirty, and like I was putting blame shame. Like I can't even properly explain it, but I don't know, I guess, you know, I felt like a sinner in church. Like I just felt wrong.
Yeah, felt wrong. Okay. So that would be how it felt for the client hearing Betty do that.
Yeah, definitely. Grace had her camera on for that. We both did. And I could see where it was like she was sort of thinking, oh, is this true? Is this right? Like, how could you say that? Like, I could see the expression on her face. And then we like paused it and had a little debrief and then carried on with the role play.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. Thanks for doing the debrief, which we would unpack. The other part of the assessment, which doesn't go quite as deep as that, is that Betty actually says, you don't even look like you need our help. There's other people who need things more than you. And so it's quite a shock to actually read it. But what you've got to do is identify which legal which acts, what would be the breaches of that worker who would be doing that, identify it and then give it a name. So you're having that emotional response around it, which is what Priyanka would, or Grace in this case. However, what laws would it break? And that's what it's going to ask of us. So, do I have another Betty? Kim, were you a Betty?
Yeah, thank you. I was trying to avoid feeling judgmental. So in my presentation, my thoughts were, I shouldn't be judgmental. I shouldn't do this. I shouldn't do that. I don't want to sort of put a bias on what was presenting to me. But at the same, it's a bit like, I don't know, I felt like a duck, all calm on top of the water, but my legs were paddling underneath. sort of thinking, oh, yeah, my first impression would be, why does she need help? She's got plenty of resources. And then the client disclosed, oh, well, yeah, I like to dress up to feel good because my partner makes me feel so bad. And he goes away and I have to stay home and not actually have a life. And then comes home and, I try to present myself, and then he's abusive because he thinks I've spent all the money that he's earned. So yeah, has a very unhappy life. And the only way to make herself feel better was, to try and present herself in a way that made her feel good about herself. So yeah, it would be very easy to be judgmental.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah.
Yep.
So,
Thank you.
hold on, let me just do a bit of crowd control.
Mum, are you downstairs? Can you check the car for my vape?
Yeah, so that was, yeah, it would be very easy to get judgmental. And the same thing with, and I've had other clients who present a certain way, and it's very easy to sort of be judgmental just by, you know, an appearance even, until they start to tell the story. So
So we're
I
talking
don't
about
know.
two
Yeah.
biases there, Kim. Thank you, which is great. We
Thank
have
you.
a bias and you're aware of it, like you're doing all that self-reflection and making sure that you don't do it. So you're really struggling with it because I gave you the task, and it wouldn't be a natural state for you to be in. But then we have this thing called unconscious bias that we don't actually know that we do. It's like, oh, I'm looking at that beat up car as opposed to this fancy car. I'm looking at this fancy dressed woman as opposed to this. And that can be reversed as well. So when I said at
Yeah.
the beginning of our classes, where there's a lot of media around it and they're even putting data up. Now, the only reason the data goes up is like if it is a low socioeconomic area, low income area, which would, how they measure that is the disposable income of a family to spend per annum. So I live in what's referred to as a low socioeconomic area. Youth unemployment is 37.5%. And underemployment is quite high. However, it does have a disposable income of about $1,500 per year of money that nobody, like they just want to go out and blow. Whereas in the Sunshine Coast, not that far down the road, then they would have $2,250 a year disposable incomes. So that's how they measure it, not by cars or clothes or things like that, because often a lot of people who have very little will do the most for their children or the most for something. So we can't judge it, you know, like that could have been Priyanka's best outfit, or a friend gave her that outfit because she was being financially abused and had no money to go and buy those things. Or Priyanka might be an excellent op shopper and found an amazing outfit for $10 on the rack, you know. So we don't know the story behind it, and that's where we're coming from, that unconscious bias. Have I got any other Bettys that struggle with being in that discriminatory space? Trent, you a Betty?
Yeah, I was a bad Betty.
You are a bad Betty.
I didn't even do it properly because I just
You
went.
couldn't be bad enough.
No, I just went. I think Rochelle had to tell me to stop and be worse.
Oh, you.
Yeah.
Oh,
So I think I was doing my job properly.
yeah. Okay. So what was your tipping point, your struggle point with being Betty?
Well, I don't know. You kind of don't even think about being mean to somebody in that situation. So I kind of just didn't go down that path at all.
Yeah. Yeah. So just very unnatural for you to do that.
Yeah.
And that's that unconscious bias stuff that sits there, is like, you would not do that. And so this is going against the grain for you. And Sky's going, it felt wrong. She felt it, you know, like more than just in words, but actually physically was having a response around, like that's the opposite to how Sky would conduct herself in the sector.
Yeah.
As well. So let's move over to Priyanka. Thank you for that. So Rochelle, do you want to tell us how you felt about Betty?
Yeah, well, once we did get down to the proper role play, oh, Trent, it was very unnatural, but I get it. I was like, no, I think you need to be a little bit more meaner if you can. So, once we did get there, though, yeah, you feel like you're being judged. So Trent did the eye roll, and so what we went down the path of was, I said to Betty, I don't think I can afford, you know, crisis housing or a motel tonight. And I don't want to tell family and friends and stay there, even though I'd be safe there, because I don't want to let them know about what's going on yet. And Betty sort of said, well, looked at me with the eye roll and said, well, I'm sure you can afford it. And that's probably because of the gold jewelry I was wearing.
Hmm.
But, you know, we shouldn't, and that's what we sort of said, like, at the end of the day, and the moral of the story is probably going to be, we never judge. It can be all walks of life, battered people. So, yeah, and she was probably dressed up. I think someone sort of touched on it before. And that's because hubby was out of town and she probably doesn't get to dress up like that while he's around. So
I think that's a really good point. I think in this scenario, it actually says that he demands that she dresses up when she goes out because it's a reflection on him. In the actual scenario, it tells us that. But you're right, there's so many other scenarios that could be going on behind that. So Priyanka, you felt judged, went on they're judging you by how you look, not what you're actually saying, not hearing you, not believed. You didn't feel that you were believed about your need, and that you felt judged in that space. So that's great. So this is definitely the wrong way to do this, but we've got to sit in this space to be really connected to what is happening for our clients. So have I got another Priyanka? I've had 3 Bettys. I need 3 Priyankas. Who's another Priyanka? If you're not comfortable jumping on camera, because I know we had 2 people in, just drop it into chat and see if there's anything else that you can add to that. Okay, so as we started at the beginning, it was being believed and being able to come back. So I've got 2 Priyankas in there. All right, so we're going to jump in again into role plays, and we're going to take this a little bit further. So I want you to be able to shake all of that off. So those of you who have a device, I want you to do some research about a domestic family violence service. Now, one of your tasks that we need to do with this unit is to be able to put together a brochure or something that has all of that information around it. So your research has to find a domestic family violence organisation, research the services, what might be useful information to give Betty's. Now we've got nice Betty, not bad Betty. And we've got Priyanka, and Betty's really hearing Priyanka. Betty is not discriminating. Betty is actually an amazing service support worker and has looked beyond everything, the visual, and gone to really listening, that active listening. What's happening for you, Priyanka? And how can I work with you today? So we need to give Priyanka a kind of brochure or something. So what are you going to put into this brochure? What information? So useful supports, what abuse is, and then other types of information that you're going to put into it. And this is actually part of your assessment work for this unit, and how we need to be able to do what abuse is. So here we go. So this is for what is this role play? I just come on. So Emma, somebody will jump in for you. We're going into the breakout room, and you'll be with another person, and they'll coach you, or I'll put you into a 3 and you can observe, Emma. It'll be in your recording when you play it back, but this will be your role play for the unit CHCDFV001. And sitting around that, one of the exercises, your project work, is that you need to design a brochure or an information piece around that. So I'm just going to let some people in. Sorry, just admit all. Yep. And if you don't know of a domestic family violence service, I'm going to put one in here for you. So this is a service that exists. If you put it into your phone, one person will need to be able to do the research. And together as a group, you're going to come back with what we're going to put into a brochure or a poster. Okay, so if you put in Edon Place, it is in Bundaberg. And so that has a website. You might go, what is a domestic family violence service provider in someone's postcode that's in your breakout room? Okay. So your what are the things that you're going to put into your brochure? What would be the most useful? You might decide to do a flip card, and it might just have numbers and that. But not everybody knows what abuse is. So I don't know if people have been into a hotel or into an airport, but often on the back of a toilet door, you'll see that there's a lot of community type information, education and awareness. So it might be things about rape. It might be things about assault. It might be you, if you are fearful of somebody that you're with, that could be a big drive around education awareness. What would be the kind of information that you think would be most helpful for someone like Priyanka if she didn't get looked after today, if she wasn't ready, but she needed the information for the time that she is ready? And Priyanka is anybody that's coming to you around those services. You might decide to put into your brochure the person who goes, well, maybe I am abusing my partner and I didn't even think of it as abuse. Have this around its information, education and awareness. Not too wordy, but what kind of things would you like to put into that brochure? So I'm going to pop everybody into that. We've got 10 minutes. And somebody will need to do the research on a phone or their device, and then all of your ideas come back, and then somebody just needs to write that down or put that into the system and then read from that as well. Just send a text to yourself if you like as you're jumping into that space. So recreate. I'll make our rooms a bit smaller. And there's enough for everybody to have their ideas in this space now. So 10 minutes and come back. And those of you who aren't going to be in a breakout room, you can jump in. I'll stop recording. So welcome back, everyone. We had bigger groups and everybody was just jumping into what would be really helpful to be putting into their brochure. So could I get some feedback from some of the groups about what you think you would put into a brochure or a poster or a card? What information would you think would be essential?
I can start off, Vicky, in our group, if you'd like. Oh, no, someone who is that?
Are you right?
Oh, I don't mind.
We put in there, I was with Grace and Caleb, and we put in housing, phone numbers and an email, because obviously she might not be ready to talk. We also, Caleb made a valid point of actually putting in the brochure what abuse actually is, because there's different types of abuse. So like verbal abuse, physical abuse, financial abuse, all of them with a little description of what they are, because sometimes they don't realize that they're actually being abused and to what extent. And then also some counselling services. We don't know if she's a mum or not, but putting in some parenting, contact details, and something like the Salvation Army or some of those places that could actually, help her, move forward. But yeah, they were the kind of things. We didn't want to put too much information in it also to overwhelm her, but just a little brief description of what that place actually does for her or how they could help her was what we did. Yeah.
Great. So mostly visual?
Yeah, mostly visual and a lot of contact details, but both email and phone number, just in case she's not ready for talking.
Brilliant. That sounds good. Like that would be who, what, how, when, where, why. Good formula.
Yep.
So great. Another room. Where did you go?
I can go.
Thanks, Amber.
So I put like the phone numbers.
Oh, yeah.
And I also put what is abuse, but with like maybe like hand signs or just like a little bit of wording, so it's like not too much for someone to read. Also including like the after hours, and I also put mobile support because I thought that one is pretty handy, because if someone's not feeling safe and they are scared to leave, it's handy to know that they have mobile support services coming out. I also did housing, and I included the men's program because I feel like if a man, obviously like if he saw that, he might read it and, not think too much of it. But if, they kind of see men's program, it might be, kind of help men, open up a little bit more. And then I just put plus many more services because I didn't want to put too much on there as well.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. I like that you are acknowledging that we're not only staying in that space, because there's a lot of work, like I said, over the 70s, a lot of that work happened. There's an author called Erin Pizzey, and opened up the very first, in England, the very first shelter for battered women. And so with that, a lot of work was done. And while I might hear, because I work with a lot of males, predominantly my clients are males. And so it's about, there is a lot of discussion and a lot of work that's been done that women have driven. And it's not that there aren't services there for men or other genders as they identify. It's just that the work was already done, and coming off that work, we would share that knowledge, that information, and go from there. It's not that it's not happening. It's just that it's there's a lot of women who did that movement around there as well. So, but there's absolutely anybody can be a victim of domestic family violence. So, Emma, question? Something to add?
The only question I've got to ask is, how would you'd have to look at it differently if it's a man coming to see you. I have seen a lot of, like, I've lived in places where there's been a lot of domestic, like not in my home, but in a community where there was a lot of domestic violence. And I remember, like, the women got all the sympathy in that, like, other men would want to beat up their men for hitting them. But, like, I literally saw this Sheila bashing into her old bloke. And, like, when he said something, he was called a girl. Like, how would you tackle that? Because, like, there is so much, like, real men don't hit women, all that bull stuff. I don't want to swear, sorry. All that stuff. But there's, like, how would you go about it? Because men would feel really emasculated if they had to go in and be like, my missus is belting me. Like, there'd have to be a different way to approach it, because there is probably just as much violence against men as there is against women. Because, like I said, I lived in a community, saw a lot of it in the outer community, but no one talks about it. Like, there would have to be a really, really big difference in the approach because of traditional gender roles and all of that sort of stuff. Like, how would you go about it if it was a bloke?
Yeah, so
not a Sheila.
Really, really good point that you're making, Emma. So for the very first thing is, I remember that what is my role, and in that space, I'm a youth worker and I'm working in the community sector. So the very first thing is that I see and work with the person. And the root cause here for me is about the body of work that I would be doing with them or anybody else is about having a relationship. So a healthy relationship with self and others. I'm not really getting into that, but that's me. So if a male comes in and goes, this is what's happened to me, I'll go exactly the same way as what I would if a female came in and said, this is what is happening to me. But you are right. You've made a really good point. And I don't think it's something that I want to be able to speak on behalf of any of our male clients, because I don't know what that feels like. I just got you to do a role play around being Bad Betty, and that was uncomfortable enough, just not being a professional worker.
I'm sorry, I didn't want you to talk on behalf of your
No,
male
no, no.
clients.
I'm
I
not-
was saying
Yeah.
you as a professional, how, like,
How
I
would
know you want to, yeah, like, I know you'd want to go in it as the same way if it was a Sheila coming in.
Yeah.
But like I said, I've seen it. You can't physically do it because there's different stigmas that you have to tackle, and like there's different ideal. I can't think of the word. Sorry, but there's different.
Maybe like
Sky
male
wants to jump in. Sky?
running the men's programs. Like if it was specifically a male that was running the men's program, might make males feel a bit more comfortable about like opening up and whatnot.
So refer to the best service for that male. So the men's program sounds good. Not men get better or men do it right. It's actually men and then work on healthy relationships. So refer to the best service provider. So Emma, you absolutely are spot on. I completely agree with what you're saying. It is hard and it is a really tricky one as well. So and the public opinion around this, and even when they go and get help, you're right, there's a lot more judgment in that space as well, but we're working with the individual. But like I think the guys might be better to answer what that might feel like. But Sky's got a hand up, and I want Sky's input on this, knowing that she works in the sector. Sky, what would you add?
So just a quick backstory on me. I work in Central Desert Australia across 8 very incredibly remote Indigenous communities. So there already is a lot of stigma around the boys and the men that I see, that you've got to be a man, you've got to take care of your family and support. They don't even recognize that they're being abused. So they're coming to you for help, and they're not sure why they're coming to you for help because they don't fully understand they're being abused, but the relationship is wrong. And then as well, just that shame because they're so proud to be men. They feel like they're failing as men because they've put themselves in this abuse situation. It's pretty much like our females going into it. You give them the same information. This is what abuse is. This is what happens. It doesn't make you any less of a man. You're not pulled away from your culture. Nothing negative is impacting you. This is very normal. A lot of it is that basic conversation for maybe like an extra 3 or 4 sessions before you start even suggesting referring to go to a men's support group or men's shed or anything like that, because then you've just spooked the man a lot of the times, or the young boy a lot of the times, because they're still trying to come to terms with they're being abused, they're feeling less than a man, they're not understanding it fully. So it's just a lot more. I've found you've got to be a lot more patient, you've got to be a lot more educational, and just sort of cater to their emotional, just like cater to their ego and support them, not necessarily baby them, but like speak up for them and support them. Like you've got to do a lot more empowering for men, I've found, than women. But again, that's speaking with, and not for, but with like traditional Aboriginal men.
Well, Sky, the communities I was talking about were the rural and remote communities in Cape York, so same sort of thing.
Yeah, so it's the same sort of thing, that traditional masculinity, farmer, tough man sort of stuff. Just take your time, educate them slowly, get them to understand, because they feel, I don't want to put words into their mouth, but they feel less than a man seeking support. It's very embarrassing and a shame job for them. So spend that extra time just catering and doing that understanding groundwork.
Yeah, like I said, I saw a lot of it in the community. It was a really, really small, like a really, really small knitted community. And yeah, I remember seeing, like, because I was living in a rented house in the community. Like, this is before I moved to Darwin. I moved last year, and I was living in a small, and it was also like the women's shelter, because the rented house I was living in, I was living with a teacher, because I worked at school too, and her husband was like the court community liaison person. So he would go to the courts and talk on behalf of the community members. So like, instead of going to the local women's shelter or child shelter in town, if something went wrong, they'd rock up at our place. Like, I'd wake up in the middle of the night and there'd be women outside or men outside asking for help to come in the middle of the night if they had a bust up with their partner or whatever. And so, like I said, I saw a lot of it, and that sort of, seeing all that made me want to go into this sort of thing. And I just saw, like, I wasn't working in the sector, so that's why I was asking questions. Because, like I said, you wouldn't dare see any of them men like beat on the women in the street, but you'd be walking down, say, to like the pub to get a feed after work or something, because like that was the only place to get a feed, and you'd be walking down to the pub to have a feed after work and like chill out or whatever, and you'd see this woman beating on her man like in the middle of the street, and everyone's just walking by and not doing nothing. But if it was like some old Sheila, sorry, I use a lot of saying, if it was some old Sheila standing in the middle of the road, everyone would be there pulling that man off and throwing fists and everything, but not when it was a man.
Yeah. So I think that's a really important point there that you've made. Emily, you want to drop something into the discussion?
Sorry, Vicky. Just to clarify, so Sky was saying about the men wanting that more one-on-one connection. Are we still talking about the brochure? Because how is that going to reflect onto a brochure if we're trying to make that connection but they're not ready? Or are we off the brochure topic now?
We're still on the brochure, because what the brochure is going to do is to start a conversation and bring things up. Oh, is that abuse and that? But I've just dropped in, and it's a good point. Thanks, Emily.
No worries.
Can't be what I can't see. So your brochure will show a positive male and a positive female, a peaceful female and a peaceful male. Like, we have to demonstrate. We talk about role modeling, but in a brochure, because it is a piece of paper, or it might be a website as well, and Emily, it's going to educate. That's what it's going to do. So I got you to pop in and have a look at a website which had different things. But what I wanted you to do also is just look a little deeper of what images did they put in there? How did they portray that? Do they have male workers in the sector? And like I sort of think, well, some people want to talk to only a female worker and some want to work. So if we put it in our brochure, we say, if you want to talk to a men's line, here's that number. If you want to talk to a kids helpline, here's that number. So it's like, oh, that's me, I'm a kid, or that's me, I'm a man. I want to talk to the men's helpline. There is a men's helpline. That's great. So it's like in your brochure or in your poster or in your card, it has to be, is this for me? Or is this for somebody else? And so can't be what I can't see. And we have to put the images and the language that reach everybody in that space when you're not around to be working. So even on the back of a toilet door in an airport or a hotel, it has to be a message for everybody in that space. So, what it'll do is it'll start a conversation, not verbally, it might be internally. It's going to give them a stepping off point, something to think about. It's like, I didn't know that, or gosh, so there's men's helplines. A lot of people don't even know that services exist until the matter is close to home. So you might work in a service and they'll go, I didn't even know you existed. That's because the need wasn't there for them. And so it feels like they're completely away from that sector as well. And then all of a sudden they'll go, I just didn't even know. I didn't know where to turn, and someone told me to come and talk to you. And so, for instance, if we circle back to Priyanka and Betty, and we've got good Betty, and Betty's going, well, you know, if you wanted more information, then here's a brochure and some other services. And so if Priyanka is a different culture, that's another thing in our brochure is, you know, making sure that we show different things. If it's First Nation, we have that picture in there. If we have English as a second language, then we make sure that we have, here is a way that you can get an interpreter to help you. We have to put all of that information in there to be able to help that person, because they may not come in and have the full conversation, but it's take the brochure away or the card away, and then they can look up those resources for themselves. So someone might pick up a brochure for a friend and say, look, I found this when I went somewhere. I was thinking of you. I know we spoke about it, but I wanted to give you that brochure. And so sometimes we don't know the words. As a worker, we will know those words. But what else are we going to do if on average it takes a person 7 times to leave? What are we leaving them with if the issue or an incident arises at 11:30 at night? So that's why we need to be able to go, what information needs to be in there. Right, we'll take a break. It's a pretty heavy topic, I understand that, and I really value the input that you've got, but our role is, as a youth worker, the person that's coming in, the root cause, what's really happening for that person is you sound, and we're writing our facts in our file notes, you seem to be a little flat. And we're going to only work on that. So for me, I've got in here, you know, perhaps more male workers in the sector, and it is a predominant female sector, and more males are definitely coming in. We have a mix of about 50-50 at Hader of males as well as, don't apologize, I understand your language, Emma. It's okay. So I talk Emma. So so when we're in that space for Hader, we have a lot of male learners coming into the sector as well. But you will also know that we have a lot of female trainers, though I hired a male trainer today, and I'm hiring another male trainer tomorrow, and I've got another male trainer coming on the team. So it's like, we need to see that as well. But predominantly, I would say 95% of my client group, when I'm not working at with Hader, are all males. All the males, 17 to 19-year-old young men. They're the ones that I predominantly work with. So if they're okay, but am I mindful of that? Absolutely. And then try and put them into programs where there's more positive role modeling that's happening. And like Sky said, no shame in that. You know, like, this is, men can still do that and still be this. Like in the 80s, they started to say real men eat quiche. That was an ad. It some of you may be old enough to know that, but it was like, men don't eat quiche. They eat meat and 3 veg. And you know, and gravy and things like that. That's a very European mindset, where that's very colonial thinking that we bring into that space. But of course, when we're doing diversity, we have that conversation. But for here, this is anybody everywhere, making sure that we aren't putting barriers in there because someone has a different kind of culture or a different understanding. And as Sky was saying, it's about informing and educating first. We can't just send someone off to a program if they don't think that they fit or belong in that program as well. Okay, thank you, Rochelle, taking me back to the 80s. Okay, you're gold. Okay, let's take a 10-minute break, shake off domestic family violence. Let's have a look at the protocols. the legal and ethical requirements of us, and the processes that we must follow as a worker in this space. So I'm not going to take a break. I'm here for 10 minutes, but I am going to stop recording. Anyone, I would recommend that you do take a break. Let's come in and do our final wrap up as we're jumping out. So we've got 7:45. We'll come back at 5 minutes to 8. And we'll jump into the final part of this session, and then I will do some more recording for everybody afterwards. So rights and safety, legislative rights and responsibilities, confidentiality and consent, and workers' code of ethics. So we can struggle with it. We could have an ethical dilemma and have a view, but we need to make sure that when we step into that space, we are there to help somebody who is struggling because they may or may not be a person who is stuck in the cycle of an unhealthy relationship. And then if there's a law, mandatory reporting, we need to be able to do that. So it's the lens of a worker and the lens of the client and the lens of the organization. So how do we identify the needs and respond to threat to safety? It becomes automatically a high risk. So we've got to assess and evaluate, and then we've got to respond. What do I do if I think this is medium to high? If there is any evidence of physical injuries, though we don't know the story, and then how do we ask that question? I notice that you've got an injured hand looking at this picture here. Are you okay? Is that sore? And they may unpack some of what might happen. Or some people might say, oh, I walked into a door. But your gut instinct here might tell you there might be a little bit more. It's like, oh, it's no good. Have you seen the doctor had something? So they're not going to like it if you interrogate them. They're only going to be comfortable if they trust you and feel safe around you. So they may not disclose straight away, but if it comes up, you could be working with somebody for months and they'll just say, well, actually, you know how I had that sore hand, I didn't actually do it like that. You're building relationships and relationships of trust. Not every client is going to come in the door and say something straight away. So when we give you a scenario to practice those skills, that person could be the first time they access that service, or they could have been coming to lots of other services and programs and seem like everything's fine. And they might see your brochure on the wall and go, oh, I was just looking at this brochure and I was just wondering if you could tell me a little bit about what you do with violence, you know, because my husband's out of town and I really want to leave. And so it gives, we just don't know what it is that's going to prompt them. They might have walked in 20 times and seen that brochure on the wall, and it does the talking for you. And so will your website or the things that we see. So a lot of that around the conversation around blame and shame and stigma, and how society will judge people, coming in through the door and getting help is where most of our work will happen. So we have policies and procedures and practices. So how we do an assessment, how we refer over to the appropriate services. Someone mentioned about a men's group, which is a great idea. Someone could mention about a parenting program if there's little ones involved. There's a program called Triple P. They also do it online, and that stands for the Positive Parenting Program. So if someone goes, well, this is how I was raised, but then it was like, oh, so there's that. There's another program for kids that was put together by Hetty Johnson, and that program is called Braveheart, and they have interactive, cute little avatar kind of characters online, and kids can learn about what's safe and what's unsafe, if my tummy hurts and how that feels. So who has the power over that? Like case management would happen if you are supporting somebody. If you think that there's harm to self or others, you've already done that, and then talk about a safety plan. Even if there was an incident, the police turned up, the police cannot make somebody go to court. They can put an order around them. And like most people will say, a piece of paper will not protect me. The police won't do anything until a crime has been committed. So that domestic family violence order is actually a civil order. It's not a criminal order. So it only becomes a crime if someone breaches that order. So a person who is an offender, and there could be a counter order placed where both parties are required to act in a peaceful manner. So you can have an order and still be living under the same roof. So that just means that if we turn up again and you breach this order, it's going to be a completely different conversation. So it could be learning the language, like I don't feel safe, putting a hand up and saying, I don't feel safe. I don't want to have this conversation. Perhaps it could prevent something, but if someone is escalated and they're not aware or educated or informed, so that's why we would do our case management. And the difference between a single service is come in, get the information, go. It might be a single service phone call. I just want to know, do you guys have any information about domestic family violence programs? And that if you make an appointment and you start working with someone over a period of time, that is called case management. So they sit in your caseload, and you might have some very high and complex situations. Domestic family violence might be one, housing, homelessness, alcohol and other drugs, and mental health might be what you're working in that space. So we don't know how long someone is going to stay in case management. So the service I work in, the clients exit themselves, but I've also worked in services where they have 6 sessions, and then they can ask for a repeat of another 6 sessions. And between that, then they go back to their GP and get another referral. So they can have 12 sessions in 12 months. And that's under the better outcomes in mental health programs. So, so they might have an assessment done by the GP, and then they come over to mental health clinic days that we might run and work in there. So I could have social workers, I could have psychs in the team working in that space, or I work in the non-clinical mental health. So I don't make diagnoses. I work with somebody who has a diagnosis or self-diagnose and they come in. So I don't work with anything other than the person rather than a diagnosis. It's helpful for me to know some of that. And in our mental health units, we talk about that. So we do our intentional interviewing that goes both ways. The ideal conversation is if both are there, but if you're working with someone who is trauma affected, they may not be able to say things. So I can have someone sit in front of me and I can say to them, list 10 things that are good and write 10 things that you can remember from your background or your past that was sad. And as someone is writing, a young person is writing those 10 things, tears can be coming down their face and they will not even know that they're crying, because that's clinically depressed. So where the body actually has a response that the person has no conscious awareness around that. Programmed intervention. So that might mean that you're going to have a coordinated approach. So you might be the first person they share with, but then you'll have a team who will be part of that response. So when we go to hospital, they have what's called triage. So more than one person, the 3 will all be involved in that. We do triaging at work as well. So the psych will step in, the mental health nurse might step in, and then I might be in that space as well. So we're triaging and we're all having a discussion about who will we refer. We might refer into our own services, or we might refer out to a specialist, and it's up to the client to say. Some will even say, I don't feel comfortable having this conversation locally. I would prefer to have that like Zoom or a telehealth call. All of those things could be possible because they want to know for certain that they're safe and they have privacy in that. We can offer that, but for us to know, we have to go and research some organisations, what's available online, social media. you've got to go through some websites and go, well, this is here. And part of our research is to find out, reference it. Who would you go to? I like Lifeline because they can tell me any service in any postcode anywhere around Australia. So I'm looking for a domestic family violence service in the postcode of somewhere in Northern Territory, or if you don't know that, but do your own research around it. I could go in and give you one, and the information is national. However, it's local. And so you might be looking for something for a client closer to where you are. Crisis situations and long-term support is so important for survivors. They want to know, first of all, that response, I'm heard, I'm believed, I'm validated, and then can I keep coming back to you? That's what long-term support is. I sit as an advocate in court every Tuesday. I have been working with a victim survivor for 5 years now. We first lodged a complaint with the police in December 2022. They are still investigating. We gather the evidence all the time, and there has been multiple breaches, but it's about having the evidence. So I can say it's not evidence if it's a photo that you have taken, unless there's a court order that that person cannot be anywhere near that person. That's the evidence. So a time-stamped one as well. And so 2 years later, they discovered that some contact had been made and there was a photo taken and there was evidence around that timeline that only got sent to police today. So this is something that as a worker, you could be there for a long time. And what does that give that person? Reassurance that there's stability, that I can always go. Now, it may not be me as that worker, but it's the organisation, or I can find another organisation who can be there long term. Immediate response, can we call straight away? They may need that. If your office is closed at 5 o'clock, or you're working with someone on a weekend, you may need to be able to respond quickly in that time. Look, this sounds like we need to do a well-being check. Well, that's 000 ambulance, where they say, who do you need, police, fire, or ambulance? Ambulance are mental health responders. They're 000. They will be able to assess the risk, the mental health state. They'll do all of that assessment. They have the power, if someone is having an episode or in psychosis, the person who is the offender or the victim, they can come and do a mental health assessment. And they're still my first responders that I would go to, because they are so skilled and so caring in that space. Then you've got someone else to work with you. So I do realise that not every state or territory has free ambulance like Queensland. That's all covered by the government. So there is no fee attached to it. It used to be built in to our power, our electricity, but about a decade ago, Queensland determined that it was going to be free. Discussion. What may occur if there is insufficient or non-existent long-term support for the client? The same as Bad Betty. Feeling judged, not believed, nobody's going to give you the support because they've already made a judgment call. Or if you're only there for that crisis and then the ongoing afterwards, then people can feel isolated, and that, look, I've had my one go at getting support and I can't keep going back to them. We might work with different groups, people with differing abilities. We might have people who belong to certain minority groups. We might have cross cultures as well. So it needs to be safe. We also need to make sure that we follow the laws around, we talk about the Privacy Act, but we also need to talk about discrimination. We need to be aware of the Disability Act as well, and the Human Rights Commission. What sits around there, and then the Geneva Rights of a Child, the Geneva Convention, and there is a code around that as well. You can reference that in your assessment work. Cultural, religious, sexual identity, age, and disability. We've done our brainstorm. So clients' needs and the services. So safety, physical and emotional, getting assistance and being protected. And all of those things cross over in that space of the work that we do. So we're assessing their safety right now. Is this a high risk? Am I going to need to come up with something quickly? What assistance do I need to? It's like, no, I'm not there yet. I just wanted to find out information. Here's your brochure. Here's your card. Here's the number. You can put this app in your phone. And if you are in that app, it gives you an escape button, you can get out of it and nobody can see what you were looking at in that app. That's designed for safety. And then about protection. Do you know who to call? Have you got somewhere you can go and stay? Have you got a plan? Have you got a go bag? Those sorts of things. If someone's not ready yet, what does that actually look like? That's the kind of assistance and protection that somebody might be looking for. And the other services, you don't have to be everything. In fact, it's really unhealthy for us to have that client really dependent on us for it all. So it could be, like Kim mentioned, it could be around housing first. That would be one of those things. Counselling, ongoing support, and providing the assistance that they need. It could be practical, it could be case management, or it could be a referral to another agency. We just let Emily back in again. Hey. The welfare of the children, this is where your mandatory reporting comes in. So if there are children, they cannot advocate on their own behalf. We cannot assume that the parent has capacity to keep them safe. A trauma-affected victim survivor is, if they talk about the abuse and what is happening in front of the children when that person has been removed from the house, it can actually be reported to child safety that that conversation is considered abuse. So I encourage parents, if they're going to talk about anything, that they don't do that in front of the children, because you are re-injuring a child. They don't have capacity to understand. So they see that parent, the very person who's their whole world, upset and affected, and they worry and they internalize. And kids who have been victims of abuse by one of those parents, the offending parent, who is yet to be able to, workshop their way out of it, or maybe they never will, they want that person to like them as a child. So a child will blame themselves before they will blame that adult. So the legal or medical information, so your notes form part of that casework. And then what is that safety plan? So you might refer someone to a GP, and if they go, I haven't got any money, you would have a partnership, or a GP that you know that bulk bills, hopefully, or it might be telehealth and you can get them to have a GP. There's quite a lot of services. You need to know what supports are available for your clients. We did our research in our breakout room about going in, and I gave you one place called In Place, but find the ones that are in yours, responding to their needs. So identify any limitations. Do you have funds? Do you have somewhere to go? So we're just trying to work out which bits do we fit in, but we're still documenting. Just because we may not need to be the ones, we need to make sure that the file notes are there. I'm going to check in on you. You're going to go and stay at your sister's. You're going to send the kids to your sister's because you want to make sure they're protected. Whatever that safety plan looks like for them. And you do that in collaboration with them. You negotiate and you reach an agreement with your client. This is not you can put it there by giving them information, but you aren't making that decision for them. And accurate records, which is where I started. I cannot emphasize enough to you how important your own notes are. So when you do this assessment, the questions that we're asking you, and when I assess it, or even in your role play, I'm ticking off lists. Did the client demonstrate, or did the learner demonstrate active listening with the client? How did they do that? The pauses, the unconditional regard. So you might see me mark some of your work and I'll give you that feedback. Like I might say, oh, Trent, you've demonstrated here some, really good sector standard around unconditional regard, non-judgment, empathic language. I'll give you feedback specifically around what that's like. If there's something that I want someone and they've passed, but I think it might be helpful, remember to sign the document, even though it's scenario and it's not real in your assessment. Still sign off on the bottom of it where you go, well, I'm this worker and that's not really my name. Sign the bottom of the form. That's what makes it a legally compliant document. Okay, so it's all hypothetical. You could be Billy Blogs or Bad Betty. You could be whoever you want to be in this space, but you must, if it tells you you are a worker and this is your name, sign that on the bottom of the consent form or the referral form or your support plan. Always sign off on it, because that could be subpoenaed to be sitting in court. And that could be enough where they go, I can't do anything with this. Nobody signed it. You could have written this yourself. That's not evidence. So it could fall over with something just as simple as that. So when we're actually sitting in this space here, Rochelle, question around that.
Sorry, Vicky. Emma has a question just before we get on to the next bit.
Oh, great. I'm so sorry. I can't see Emma in that space. Emma.
Do you want me to read the question for you?
Yes, please. Thanks, Rochelle.
So Emma just said, how do you convince a parent that is abuse? As I didn't know that was abuse until now.
You don't convince the parent. You report it to the experts. And then child safety will be the ones who will talk to them about positive parenting programs, maybe going to some of those, and they'll go, oh, I didn't even realize that. Like Emma saying, I didn't know that. Well, a lot of people don't know that. But when you're sitting in front of child safety, especially when it's like two parents struggling and playing the kids against each other in this tug of war, well, I love my dad and I love my mum, I love my mum, my dad, that is really difficult. And we are youth workers. So our primary client is that young person or the early intervention prevention. So we're talking about being as a youth worker, it might be the parent that comes in and goes, I don't know what to do with my 15-year-old boy. But then the 15-year-old boy might come in and work with you and disclose some other things. So it's not about us judging that. It's like if they go, it's just doing my head in, I can't stand it anymore. You know, parent A is always talking about this stuff. I can't ever get away from it. Like, I know that they need to talk to somebody about it, but it's harm. It's considered a form of abuse. And I will have that conversation with clients. Make sure you don't have these conversations around your children, because if you get a complaint and someone is trying to be vexatious and report you to child safety because they want to get at you or whatever, for parents, it's a protective thing for the parent to know how to do that. So we don't have to do that unless we're working with a 15-year-old, and we can say it must be hard to hear those words because it reminds you and it triggers you and it re-injures you. So we're helping that young person find the language to say it's not okay. So with the parent, we would refer that over. It will come from the school. It could come from a GP, and it could simply be that person is not is still going through their trauma healing and recovery, and they weren't even aware that living in the same house, it can be re-traumatizing. That if the mother is upset or if the father is upset, that child is also by default part of that victim space. So child safety won't remove children unless there's actual intent and refusal to be assisted. But reporting, mandatory reporting, that doesn't necessarily mean that someone's going to come in and take your children. But if you ignore it and you can't keep your children safe from any form of abuse, that's under the Child Safety Act, and it's also written into the domestic family violence law. A third party cannot be used, so nobody can even go and talk to your kids and go, oh, you know, don't tell anybody anything, or your mum wants to talk to you or your dad wants to talk to you. If there's orders of no contact, that third party person can also be charged. So we've got to build rapport, analyse, propose, debate, and reach an agreement and close. Well, I can spend a lot of time in that debate space. It's like, well, why can't I? I've got the right to, and that as well. I'm going, you absolutely do, but you've got young ears, you've got young eyes. They are not an adult. They cannot process this. When they see their person upset and sad and crying, then they feel fearful. What will happen to them if, or me, if something happens to them? When they're hearing adult conversations, they don't have the capacity to understand what that might mean for them. Well, if I'm bad, then maybe that parent will go as well, because the child thinks that the parent left them. But it could be too difficult because the parents don't know how to co-parent yet. Now, that does not mean that there are not successful places. Is it uncomfortable? At times, but that's why people think they're going to family court to talk about all the things that happen to them, but they're not. Family court is for children. Family court is to represent the rights of a child to have a relationship with both parents if it is safe to do so. And if they can't reach that agreement in family mediation and get their certificate, then it goes to trial. And both parties have to prove that they can parent in a cooperative manner, respectfully, for the safety of the children. So, of course, they'll take any evidence, but it's the child's right to have a relationship with both parents. That's what family court is about. And if parent keeps a child away from another parent, it's not what they're doing to the other parent, their ex-partner. It's actually what they're doing to the child, and the court will not have it. And a lot of parents go into family court and think it's actually about their story. It is not. It's about, are you going to be a fit and proper parent? So in Queensland, you can apply for legal aid, and both parents can apply for that. So it's $68,500 to go to family court without a barrister. You can sometimes apply for extra, but that's what it costs to go to court. So they will not tolerate two adults playing out their stuff in family court when it comes to custody. Absolutely will not. Any parent can be charged and sent to jail in a family court if they are not respecting the court's role in that space. So yes, domestic family violence evidence can be submitted, but only if you are going for no contact orders. And that will be, you're providing evidence that it is unsafe for the child to be around that particular parent. And a psychiatrist analyzes all of the family, both sides. And then the children's lawyer talks to all of the children. So the children have their own lawyer in court. The parents have to get their own. The court appoint a children's lawyer. That is what family court is for. And a lot of people don't understand. They think it's about who got who. It's not about that. And it really is just such a false sense of hope for people, thinking that they're going to go into court and that they're going to get to tell their story. It is not about that. Not family court. There's other property settlement and things like that. That's a completely different conversation. Family court is about, you can't be together. We understand that protection orders are in place. We're here about the children, because if it is safe for the children to have a relationship with each parent, that's the rights of the child. So we talk about consulting, and you may have to walk beside somebody who is going through all that and really doesn't even want to accept that. And in their heart of hearts, they're going, but look at what they've done. The children aren't safe. I must protect the children. It's coming from a good place, but that is not what the court is for. So explain why the referral is needed. Gain consent, and then holistic care it is more than just sending to housing and making sure that Centrelink payments are there, that the family tax benefit happens, that sole parent, who is the primary carer, anyone who spends 4 nights out of 7 is the primary carer in the eyes of Centrelink, regardless of what the court said. It's got nothing to do with it. So it is 4 nights out of every 7, even if you're working it out fortnightly, they are automatically the primary carer. Now, when the courts say week on, week off, 50-50, then that parenting payment changes. So that can be a real revelation for people as well. So and the funds that somebody gets from Centrelink are for the children. So if the children are 50% there and 50% there, then you're equally sharing the costs around that. So that's why the Australian government brought in child support, but there is some people who it is unsafe in domestic family violence situation to even be part of that child support. And so there'll be a certificate issued by Centrelink where they assess, they consult, they explain, they gain consent, they look at holistic care, and they will say, we're issuing a certificate that it would be a risk for you to have any contact with that parent. And you could be at greater risk if we enforce for them to pay child support. So that parent will go without child support. Review referrals and services. There's standard policies that you have around that, and it's about intake, assessment, referral, consent, doing an individual support plan around somebody, and then your reflections as well. I know we ask you to do a reflection sheet, but that's actually not the one that I was talking about where you speak freely to yourself. That's just how you unpack your day. An incident report is also part of your legal requirement to do that, and that's a standard in your organisation regardless. We set goals, short-term, medium and long-term. If someone's in crisis, it's always short-term. Short-term first. Deal with the high-risk areas, and then when things settle down, do your follow-up. You'll have strategies to apply, and then if something changes, then you modify it. So that's what case management is that you're always reviewing it. Even things like checking that the phone number that they have, that they first came in with, and if it takes 7 times, if we've called the wrong phone number and we leave a message, I would like to leave a message for so-and-so, it's domestic family violence service, that could place that client at high risk simply because that phone number might still be with that person and someone has doesn't want that information to be out there. A safety plan involves not telling the other person. So we have to make sure we review. Family foibles, Kim and Harley will leave that. So we've done our research around our place. So rights and responsibilities of clients and workers. So you may have someone that you work with or a peer that it can be triggering for them. If someone comes barging into the place, we've got to make sure that everyone is safe. So it can be a threat. So we can have panic buttons, that we can have an exit. You'll have a policy and procedure around that. So I rarely go to someone's home. If there is an emergency, I would have called 000. So I'm not going on my own. I don't know whether I'm going to be walking into a situation where there's weapons. So there are people who are trained for things like that. And that would be the police. Identifying client needs. So that means, really hearing what they're saying, assessing the risk. Have you been threatened? One question asked, you'll go further in your own time around the case study around Kim and Harley, who is 7. You've got one as well that you need to be able to review. So in this space here, just making sure that I'm getting those notes from everybody. So some are heading off. Thanks, Sky. Amazing work. Thank you, Emma, for your question. And that's fine. So we were able to unpack that, and it's in our recording as well. So in this space here, it's complex, but our role as a youth worker is process, protocols, and process. So holistic could be sending everybody off to maybe a men's shed program, or you know, engaging in more time around can't be what I can't see. So if I'm around that and they have someone in that program, they might talk about things. Yeah, well, I don't really know. Like Sky unpacks some great stuff about, first of all, not sending somebody off until they understand there's no shame in that. Like, oh, well, I can't complain, or I can't do anything because I'm the man, you know, I'm the one I'm supposed to put up with. Or kind of a man lets their partner beat them up, you know, like, you know, that's on me. You know, they don't understand that they can be a victim of domestic and family violence as well. Not all, some suspect it, but they, once you are a victim, it's about wearing down, it's about gaslighting, it's about eroding the confidence in that person, where maybe that person is right about them. Maybe nobody will believe me. Gosh, when I go to the police, they didn't. So maybe they're right. And that's an imbalance of power. So by the time someone comes to us, we have to be able to send that message. If we're working with an offender, there is never any excuse. And that is your legal requirement to say that is abuse and that's unacceptable. It's always there, always about safety first. So it's not okay. But if they say, but I want to be able to get help, I don't understand it, it's like, we can help you. We can work with you. If they're willing to be helped, this is not a place of, well, you're bad and they're good. It isn't like that. It's about, you're here to work on having a healthy relationship with self and others. So when do you feel like that is the conversation? So, well, I'm unemployed, you know, I think I'm going to lose my job, or they've dropped my hours. What's the trigger for them? What is going on when they're under pressure that they go into that cycle of abuse, instead of taking the dog for a walk, or going to the park, or letting off a bit of steam, without adding alcohol to it, where, you know, well, I'll just forget about all my problems. But alcohol is a depressant. And so then when that wears off, then it's about the demons come out, and then the thoughts come out, and then the anger rises. And that's part of the cycle of abuse. So any other questions? Where I'm going to wrap up for the night for our recording, and I will put some extra into that. But if there's any other questions, I'm inviting everybody to please, at the beginning of our night, I put my email in there. So I want to be able to just go back to that if I can. We've covered how we communicate that. Okay, I have not, sorry. So it's Vicky, as in VIKI, that you can see here, at haiderinstitute.edu.au. Checking out, that's great. Thanks, Amber. That's really good. It's a tough subject, but your process is what will look after you. So we'll talk about professional boundaries all the way through your qualification. It can be triggering for you, so make sure that you look after yourself. But the more you learn and the more you know, the less likely it's going to have that impact for you. So I'll close off tonight. Our recording, we'll see you next week, where we start a new unit with everybody. Just in wrapping up, I've been booking one-on-ones, which I'm inviting you to do. I can do role plays with you if you don't have someone to do a role play with. If you would like a session where I can send you a Zoom link, I'm happy to talk to you about what is expected in a role play. So we all get stuck in our study journey. Just don't stay stuck. Know that, hey, to have one-on-ones for you. If I've got availability, we can go ahead and put that support in. You might only need to have that 2 or 3 sessions one-on-one, and then you'll be right to go. But if you need that support, it's myself. All our trainers are available. You can book us through our Calendly booking system, but you can also reach out and put that in an email, and we can collaborate like that. If you've got an assessment piece or a task you're not sure about, you can email that question. All you've got to do is say, hey, Vicky, I am stuck on this particular one. Tell me the name of the unit. Let me know the task number or the question, what it is around that. If you've been marked as not satisfactory, don't worry about that. There should be feedback that's sitting there for you. And if you want to talk about that, well, then we can go in. If the feedback hasn't explained it well enough, then I can say, this is what they're looking for here. So if we mark it unsatisfactory, it means we need to send it back to you. So with the feedback, then you can resubmit it. So you get 3 attempts, but we can also make that more than 3. There is no penalty for trying. It's just no point in you keep trying and trying with the same answer. We want to be able to give you that support and help you. So please reach out. Even if your availability is limited, know that we can make ourselves available a couple of nights a week. We've got more trainers coming on to be able to help you with some of those things, or getting a time for your role plays. But you do need to reach out and let us know that's what you're looking for, and let the Hader team know, or please, if you're sitting in my classes, then email me and I'm happy to assist. So I'll say good night. We're going to be working together on a new unit, which is CHCDFV001. Okay, so we'll see you all next Tuesday.